Hey everyone and welcome to the Learning Ladder. This is part 2 of my selling a shared ownership property and purchasing a new property in a different part of the country video series. So I did the first part in February. I'll leave the link below, and then obviously we are now doing the second part. So if you can't already tell, I'm in a completely different room. So obviously it was successful, but oh my goodness, what a nightmare. So I left you in the last update where we were getting nowhere fast. The people who were buying our property had been doing searches from November. It was then February. They still hadn't got their searches back. Their solicitor wasn't answering questions. There'd been an issue or a question raised back in December about whether or not there was legal access to the property via the road. Again, this was all very new to us. We had never had any issues with access to the property. It was access via cul-de-sacs from a main public street road. It looked fine to us. The bin men collected rubbish from the road, everything. There had never been any issues. Properties had sold just fine on the road. It had never been an issue that had been raised by anybody up until this one solicitor. We hadn't been able to answer that question because we just said yes, it's fine, and they were waiting for their searches to confirm that. So I think it was at least a week, maybe 10 days after that video when we finally got a response from the solicitor who was purchasing our property, the buyers who were purchasing the property. They'd finally got their searches back. We were so relieved. Great, fantastic. However, the search that was most important was, as we said, the road search, showing whether or not the road that our house was positioned on, built on, was a public road. Now, when you actually, in our case, our solicitor sent us the diagram that they'd received from their search that buyers had received, and it actually has a colour coding for depending on what road colour is, whether it's public owned, whether it's private owned, and so on. So ours was green, which meant public owned. Fantastic. However, our road was split into the main public road here, and then another road here, which was where our house was located, which had the same exact name as the public road, but it wasn't coloured green. So we're thinking, oh my god, what does that even mean? It also wasn't pink, which means it's a private road. So it was just no colour on it at all. It hadn't been marked. So that was our initial thought. Okay, maybe they just haven't updated the map to show that this is a public road. Bearing in mind it's the same name as this road here, which is green. Our road is right here. So road here, our road is right here, our house is here. So on this road. So we thought, okay, maybe they just haven't updated the map. It's, I'm sure it's fine. Again, we've never had any issues. It's never been raised by anybody. Everyone's bought their house just fine. It wasn't a problem when we bought our house. It wasn't a problem when 3 other houses on the road were sold. So it's fine. It has to be fine. So we contacted the council because I was so fed up of waiting, because basically we'd reiterated our point that as far as we know there's no issues with the road, but the buyer solicitor still wasn't satisfied, which I understand. But yet she wasn't doing anything further. She said, oh, I'll contact the company who will do our searches. Fair enough. Another week passed, still hadn't heard anything. So at this point I was just getting fed up. So what I did was I contacted the local council. So on a lot of different councils, if you go to their website, there is an actual search function where you can put in your postcode and it'll tell you whether your road is public or private. Unfortunately, our council did not have that. You had to fill out a form. So I filled out the form and it was another 10-day wait for them to reply. So we waited the 10 days and we finally got a response. It was an email received and it literally just said, thank you for your recent inquiry. I can confirm your road is not a public road. And that was it. That's all it said. So therefore the council is not responsible for it. So basically our road was a private road. Who knew? So I immediately phoned the council, and their response was, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do. I asked them the questions of, was it ever meant to be a public road? Was there any agreement in place with the builders to say that it was going to be a public road so they can have, I can't remember what the number is now. It's only been a month or so and I've already forgotten everything that I learned, but in terms of numbers anyway, but it was a section 31 or something along those lines, which was where the builder had paid an amount of money to the council to confirm that they were going to adopt this road once it had been finished. Bearing in mind our property was 10 years old, almost 11 at the time, 12 if you were to count the amount from when it was initially built. They hadn't adopted the road. The council had not adopted the road. There was no agreement in place at any point that the builder was going to ask the council to adopt the road. That's what they told us on the phone, and we were just absolutely horrified, because that just meant, what exactly? We didn't know. Did that mean that the buyers were going to back out? Would they be able to get a mortgage on a private road? You know, what was going to happen? So, and also because there was nothing in the deeds either to show that there was access to the road. That's what their solicitor said. When I read the deeds, I didn't think that, because it seemed to imply to me that for any works, so services, so internet, telephone, gas, and all that kind of thing, there was rights in the deeds that they could have access to the road. And also it said that you could have free access and they couldn't block it. But apparently that wasn't good enough for her. It had to be in the deeds. So we were absolutely panicking and horrified. So I immediately contacted our solicitor and sent him the email we'd received from the council, told him what we'd said on the phone, and he was like, okay, that's not good. I'm going to tell her. Because he still reiterated the point of that you've lived there for so long, therefore there has to be a right of access, because how else would you access your property? And no court would say you could not access your property after all that period of time. And also because, you know, why would anyone block the road? It just didn't make any sense whatsoever. So he was going on that common sense approach, that she didn't need to worry about this because obviously there's a right of access. You know, there's several people living on this road. Nobody's ever had any issues with accessing the property. It's access from a public road. Why would the public road be blocked so they couldn't access it? It didn't make any sense. So he was trying to get her on that to go along with the common sense approach, but she was not having it at all. She wanted evidence or proof, you know, that they could access the road via the deed and everything else. So it was another week that had gone by. We still hadn't heard anything. While she was doing her inquiries, we never knew what those inquiries were, and we were never told, but she was doing initial, more further inquiries to see whether or not, I don't know, what was going on. So again, another week passed, we still didn't know. We're still on tenterhooks. This was the most stressful point ever, because at this point now in time, we had spent almost £6,000 on legal fees and £2,600 on estate agency fees that were due to be paid, irrespective of whether or not our sale went through. Do not do that. If you ever sell your house, take out insurance. I did not even know this existed, but apparently you can get legal insurance to protect you. So should anything fall through at any point, you can claim, but you have to get it immediately upon the beginning of your process of sale. I didn't even know it existed. Don't be stupid like us, because we would have had to have paid almost £6,000 if this had all fallen through, and it's to think that is an absolute nightmare. So don't do that. Get insurance. Anyway, back to the point. So during that extra week, we still hadn't heard anything, but then out of the blue, we got an email from the council, and to me this was the best email I could ever receive. I was like jumping for joy, because in that email they said there was no agreement with the builder that they were going to adopt the road. However, they were happy to adopt the road if the builder got the drains adopted first. So not only was our road not even adopted, the drains weren't adopted either. So that was the only holdup. And the other thing, the crucial part of the email, which was the most important to me, was they had monitored the build of our road and confirmed that it met with their standards for adoption. Super important to make sure, if you're purchasing any property, if the road is not adopted, make sure that the road is being built to the council's levels of standard in order for road adoption to be completed. Because if it's not, if it's too thin, if the pavement is too high or whatever, they won't adopt it until those works are done, and you have to pay for those works. If it's a private road, remember, you have to pay for those works to get it adopted. So make sure if you're buying a property, ideally it's already on a adopted road, but if not, that there's a section, whatever number it is, I can't remember, I'll put it in the comments below. 31 is the top of my head, but I can't remember. Agreement in place that they will adopt the road, the council will adopt the road once it's been completed, because it's an absolute nightmare to sell a property if your road is not adopted, that your house is positioned on. Do not fall into the trap that we did. We never even knew this wasn't even an issue. We just assumed our road was adopted, because why wouldn't we? And to be honest, I didn't even know anything about adopted and unadopted roads at the time anyway, so we would never have even probably have asked, because it was not something that ever entered my head to ask, to be honest. But if you're buying a new build, crucial you ask this question, because if you ever want to sell, you're going to have the same problem we did. So in that email they said that the road had been built to the council's standard, so therefore once the builder had got their drains adopted, they would adopt it. And to me, that was our saving grace. I've never felt so much relief. But we sent it to our solicitor, and he was still saying, yeah, it just says we will. It doesn't say, like, you know, this is going to happen. I don't think she's going to accept that. Again, we had to wait another week. And during that week's time, I was still really terrified. And I was thinking, how can I, bearing in mind, you're not supposed to really communicate with the buyer, because you definitely can't communicate with the buyer solicitor, but you don't usually communicate with the buyer because it's always through the estate agent. But I thought, is there a way that I can find out whether or not the buyers are still interested, and whether it's her that's creating all these issues, or whether they care about this? So I've been packing and everything, and I was making a pile of things that I knew I wasn't going to take, either because it wouldn't fit, or because it was too much because we would go traveling long distance, so it'd be too much work to take it with us, or mostly it was because it either wouldn't fit, or because we had extra of it that matched that property. So for example, we did the floor, it was less than a year when we did the floor in the living room with really nice expensive vinyl. It was gorgeous, but we had an extra box of it, and our intention was to do our hall with it so that the living room and the hall would match, but we just never got around to it. And to be honest, it was £350 to just get the living room fitted, and you have to pay, my husband's not that way inclined, so he couldn't do it, so we'd have to pay someone to do it in the hall, and we just, because we knew we were going to sell, we just didn't want to put that investment into it. But I had this unopened pack, and I thought, okay, what if I asked the estate agent to ask the seller the buyer, if they would like this extra wood? And then I was thinking, okay, what if I asked them if they want the blinds and stuff like that? Because we weren't initially going to leave the blinds, we were going to take them with us. However, we knew that the windows here were completely different sizes, and it would take a lot of work to get them to fit. So it'd probably be just, and blinds, you want it to be precise, so it's probably just better to leave them. So again, I offered them in the email. I said, would they also like the blinds? And basically anything that I thought that they might be interested in. I put in this little, wrote this little email to the estate agent and said, could you please ask the buyer if they'd be interested in any of the following? I won't take offence if they don't want them. So it was just a way to open communication lines so I could gauge their feeling about the house and whether or not, because I was hoping that if there was a problem, they would tell the estate agent, no, we're not interested in that, thank you. And then I'd know that something wasn't right. However, when I sent the email, I got a lovely response back, and they were really interested, definitely wanted this stuff. And I was so relieved, because then I was thinking, okay, so they are still interested. So then it was just a case of waiting for the solicitor to come back to us. And they finally came back to us, and there was something illegal that they had to do, an agreement that they had to make. But other than that, it was okay. And oh my gosh, I cannot express to you how much relief we had at that point, because we would have been so financially worse off if it all fell through at that point. So my biggest take to anybody who is purchasing either a shared ownership property or a new build of any type: first, the most important thing is to check whether the road that your property is built on is an adopted road, which means that the council will take responsibility for the road and maintain it. If it's not, and if it's on a private road, that means that you are liable for anything that happens on that road, repairs or anything like that. Also, if you come to sell, some mortgage companies will not accept a road that is a private road for a mortgage, because there's all kinds of risks involved. So don't buy a house that's not on an adopted road. That's my first big take. But if you do, make sure there's an agreement in place with the council that they will adopt the road once it's been finished. Now, I don't understand why ours wasn't adopted. Bear in mind, as I said, we'd been there almost 11 years. The house had been built the previous year, so 12 years in total, and they had never at any point tried to adopt the road. Now, the only thing I can think of is, during this process, when we weren't sure about whether or not they were going to do it, I contacted our housing association, and I said to them, did they know whether or not the road had been adopted, or whether there was any agreement in place? Basically, she replied back and said, it's nothing to do with us, we don't know, you'll just have to see what happens with the legal process. But I think, and I'm not 100% sure, but I think they might have contacted the builder and said to them, are you going to hurry up with this road adoption process? Because what my thought is that this has never been a problem before until now, and now they've realised that yes, it's going to be a problem, and if our sale fell through, then obviously we'd be coming back to them, because at no point did they ever tell us that the road wasn't adopted. So, and also it affects their investment as well, because they owned half of the property too. So that would massively, well, not massively, but it can impact the house price as well. If your house is on an unadopted road, it can reduce the value of it. So obviously they've invested all this money in these houses. They don't want their investment to go down. So I wonder if they did actually contact the builder at that point and were like, come on, you need to hurry up and get this road adopted. Because at this point, there was only 2 other houses that had sold during that time frame. as in a new sale, not a well, there was one that was a resale, then there was two that were a new sale, as in it was from new that they bought it, and then there was one that purchased the whole thing themselves, so they'd staircased up. So there was only actually one that was a resale. So maybe their solicitor hadn't even noticed it wasn't an adopted road, because they got that map which showed the green line. They thought the roads were the same name. Maybe they thought, like we did when we initially received the document, that, or maybe they hadn't updated it to, mark that road green, but it's the same name as this other road, therefore it must be a public road too, and it was never noticed. I don't know, but all of a sudden, they were working on getting the drains adopted. And I did actually, for a while, I had noticed the water company were on the road doing some works, so it could be that they suddenly were like, okay, you need to hurry up and get this done, or maybe they were always planning on doing it. It just seems a bit of a coincidence that it happened at the same time as us mentioning to them that there was a problem. But again, it could just be a complete coincidence, and they were always planning to do it this year. I don't know, but it took them 11 years to finally do something about getting the road adopted. Oh, anyway, nightmare. So don't take that risk. Do not take that risk and buy a house on an unadopted road unless you know there's an agreement in place that the road will be adopted, because like I said, when you come to sell, that's the first thing the solicitor of the buyer is going to notice. And the fact our solicitor didn't notice it when we bought the house is really dodgy. At no point did they tell us that the road wasn't adopted. So unless, again, they were told that it was going to be and they assumed it was, maybe they saw the green line and thought, okay, it's the same name as this. I don't know, but something you have to be really careful of. So once that went through, and they accepted that from what the council had told them, it was going to be adopted, and whatever legal stuff that they did behind the scenes, the sale went through. However, they had agreed a exchange date that was 3 weeks from that point. So again, we still had another 3 weeks after that. What if they changed their minds? Blah, blah, blah. Again, take out legal insurance to protect yourself for your fees, because again, another tender hook, 3 weeks. This has been the most stressful part of my life, I think, the past few months. It really has, because it was all things that we didn't know that suddenly appeared, and also things that we should have known, like to take out legal insurance, that we didn't know, which could have made things a lot less stressful. So 3 weeks after that, we got our exchange date and everything, and then it was all systems go. So packing like crazy, getting the storage centre booked. Those 3 weeks were real, because we had to, basically we moved 10 hours away from where we lived, so we had to take all of our stuff, most of it at least, put it into storage, and then we had one truck on the drive with all our essentials on, so things like your fridge, washing machine, everything you needed to last for a week in your new home, until we could drive back and get the rest of the stuff. Again, do not recommend. We got quotes to movers for over 11, from up to 11,000 to 5,000. 6, I think, was the most common. I wish we'd done that, because it was such hard work to do it ourselves. I would not recommend it at all. The amount of stress on your body from doing all the lifting and everything else, to having to do driving backwards and forwards, definitely don't recommend. And also, the very first day that we hired the van, my husband drove to the first service station to put petrol in, and he damaged the van. Basically, he was trying to pull out another lorry had parked on a really weird angle that was completely not the best position to park in. So he was kind of trapped, and as he was trying to maneuver to get out of this hole that he was in, pretty much, where he couldn't get out, he scuffed the wheel arch of the van on a really high curb, and it completely snapped. The whole thing snapped off completely. So we had to pay £500 excess when we hired the van, but thankfully, by learning all about maybe we should take out legal insurance, we took out collision damage waiver insurance. The company that we hired the van from didn't offer it. We had to get it from a third party, so we did that. So hopefully we'll get our excess back. I don't know, because they have to go through the insurance claim, but hopefully we'll get that excess back. But it just means another insurance claim on us as well, which sucks, because my husband had only had an insurance claim from December, so our insurance premium this year is not going to be fun. It's already gone up because of his crash, and now there's been a third one. Well, not third from this year, but a third in total from his lifetime of driving. where he's had to claim on insurance. So therefore, that's not that, you know, if you add all these things up, it really, you know, I'm sure we're pretty much maybe 4 or 5 grand now anyway. So for the extra grand, we could have had someone do it all for us. Oh, so much better. Highly recommend not doing it yourself. So adds so much more stress to the whole process. But overall, looking back, we would definitely purchase a shared ownership property, 100%. There's no way we could have saved up the amount of equity we got. But again, bear in mind, it depends where your house is as to how much equity you will earn through your sale. But I think it's still better than just renting, for sure, because you don't get any equity at all. We did get a good chunk of equity, which was fantastic. It would have been way more had we purchased more of the house than we did, and I explained why we didn't in a previous video. We didn't buy more at the time. So wish we had, because we would have got so much more money. But don't forget, you have to play to your market, who can buy it in your area. And our area was still, and you know, is still a more poorer area. So for someone to be able to purchase that, you know, the bigger amount and everything, are they available? They might be. You know, the properties were selling in our area for more than what we purchased, but oftentimes those properties had more things like a garage or a conservatory, and ours didn't. So whether or not we would have got the full price for it, I don't know. We might have done, and that's the like kick in the backside, if you like, that we should have bought more. But I'm just happy with what we got. We did end up having to use all of our equity on our new house, so we didn't actually get any cash from it. But in theory, hopefully, provided prices don't drop, we've got equity in our new property for that same amount, basically with affordability rates, because mortgage rates have gone up so much. They needed a huge deposit in order for us to get the mortgage on this new house. So we had to use all of our equity from the old house to get this new one. Which sucked, because we could have used, you know, some of that money for moving costs, and we've got to do home improvements in our new house, which I'm going to talk about actually in a minute. But we've got to do home improvements in our new house. That would have been so nice had we have been able to use our equity, but we couldn't. Obviously, perhaps in a few years we can remortgage and get some of it back that way. But then again, don't forget, and this is the other thing, you're behind. If you've done shared ownership, you're behind on your mortgage in terms of when you can get it all paid off, because we were only paying half a mortgage and half rent. All that money we were paying towards rent wasn't obviously going towards our mortgage. So now we're really behind in terms of, had we have been able to buy a house outright from the beginning, we would have paid 11 years off a mortgage in full off, whereas we were only paying half of off a mortgage, because we were having to pay half rent, half mortgage. Does that make sense? So we're behind in that respect. So really, we don't want to take the equity out of our house, the new house, unless we absolutely have to, because again, behind mortgage, and you don't want to be working till you're 90 in order to be able to pay your mortgage. It's just not realistic. So just something else to consider. But anyway, let's talk about the new house now. So we bought our new house in Scotland. The England and Scotland system is completely different. I chose to find a solicitor who was qualified in both England and Scotland, so he could do both sale of our old house and purchase of our new house in one transaction. We had to do that for a reason, because all our money was tied up in our original property, so we didn't have a deposit for our house, for the new house. So it was, all our deposit was in the old house, the old equity. So that's number one. But also because I thought it'd be so much easier than having another solicitor involved in the mix. It was already a nightmare just having the buyer's solicitor of our old house and this one. I couldn't have even imagined having a third solicitor involved. They didn't like each other, or if they did, they were very, I think our solicitor was very cordial and nice with her, but I think she had a beef with him, because she was always not happy about his responses and everything else. And I don't know, that could just be my interpretation. Maybe they got on swimmingly, I don't know. But all I know is that there seemed to be a lot of, well, we haven't heard back from them, or, you know, she's not happy with this response, and blah, blah, blah. So having a third solicitor, no. So we did end up having the one solicitor, which I highly, highly recommend. I think our solicitor was fantastic. He did a great job under the really difficult circumstances of things we didn't know about appearing, like the road and everything else, and also just managing the housing association as well, because don't forget, if you're doing a resale, you've got the buyer solicitor, the housing association solicitor, and the solicitor of the new house that you're purchasing, in theory, that, you know, need to all line up. And if there would have been another solicitor as well for Scotland, that would have been a nightmare. So my solicitor was qualified in England, Scotland and Wales, so he could have done transactions in all three areas, which is fantastic. Was it more expensive? I actually don't think it was. So I costed up doing it separately and doing it with him, and there was not much in it at all. Hardly anything in it at all. And he could have charged us way extra for all the hassle with her, the original solicitor, and he didn't. And I'm not saying all solicitors would do that, because they probably wouldn't, but he was really great, and he didn't actually charge us any extra for all the additional work that he'd have to do in order to get this road situation resolved, which was amazing. I was so grateful. But it wasn't more expensive. That's all I can say, to have just the one solicitor, because I read lots of different people's opinions about how that'd be more expensive to do. It wasn't. So I would recommend, if you can, if you're buying in one part of the country and selling in another, to see if you can find one solicitor to do both. Now, it did take a while for me to find him. I scoured the internet, and I only found him by finding a blog post that he'd written about the process. And it's not impossible to find them, but they are kind of more niche, because in his situation, he had a small team within his office that did this specific thing, and it is quite complex what they have to do, because they have to line everything up, and the legal system is completely different. So in England, you have the estate agent, and the estate agent pretty much rules the roost in England. In Scotland, it's the solicitors that rule the roost, because in England, the estate agent does all the valuations of the property. They do all the offers and everything else. In Scotland, the solicitor does that. So it's very different, and also it's a very different process, and it usually is faster. Not always. In our situation, it definitely wasn't. It's usually faster in Scotland than it is in England to actually complete the sale process, and you don't tend to have the gazumping risk where someone can come in halfway through the transaction and say, actually, I'm going to offer more, and you lose your sale. Although it's not completely ruled out either, and I think a lot of people think that it is. If you buy in Scotland, you're completely safe, and that's not true. Until you actually get that final contract, they can still, either party can still back out. So I don't know where this comes from completely, where people think that it's safer. I think it is a little bit, because I think most people, once they've accepted an offer, generally speaking, in Scotland, it usually does go through, but not always. And they still actually legally can back out up until the final contract is agreed. So the final missive, they call them missive, is done. Either party can still actually back out. So in our situation, though, the process wasn't fast, because the people who we were buying from did not have the deed to the property, because it was never registered on the system, because it had been in one person's hands for 30 odd years, and they died, and it had never been registered on the system. So that took a really long time in order to get the deed and everything else. But thankfully, because our sale was taking so long, it all married up in the end. Although I think technically speaking, they were ready a month or so earlier in Scotland, but we weren't, because of the whole road situation. So they did wait for us, which is fantastic. You might not always get that, so take that as we know. Just be careful in terms of, if there are, get all your eggs lined up first as much as you can. Obviously, things can come out in the legal process that you didn't know about, like ours did with the road. But when you're making your original purchase, if you can try and make sure all your paperwork's there, so things like all your building warranties, things like your gas safety certificate, make sure you've got all that to hand, because they ask for that straight away. Again, road, really important. Make sure your road is a public road, not a private road, an adopted road. So you can do your your checks up front, you do diligence, if you like, up front as much as you can. But obviously you can't guarantee throughout the process that nothing is going to come up, because sometimes it can. But thankfully, in our case, there was a problem with our our purchase of the new house anyway, so they kind of lined up, which is fantastic. So yes, it's very different. It's not at all impossible. We did it just fine, and I don't think it's as complicated as people make it out to be. I think provided your solicitor is good and knows what they're doing, they can actually line it up perfectly, and they can do it in a way you don't have cash deposit as well. So don't think it's completely out of the, you can't do it. It's impossible if you don't have the money for your deposit. They can do exchange and complete, which is what we had to do at the same time in order to be able to purchase. It is completely possible, and it doesn't matter that it's a different country as in Scotland. You can still do it that way, a different legal system. you can still do it. So that was fantastic, because that was another one of my fears. Would we be able to do that because we were going from England to Scotland? But yes, you can, just fine. But yes, very different system. I think their system is more smoother, to be honest, because they have to get the survey up front. So in England, you only get your survey once you've put your offer in and everything else. And only if you're wanting to take this survey. Not everybody does. Some people just do the valuation survey. But if you want the survey of the property as well, you have to pay for that as the purchaser, and then obviously negotiate price if anything comes up. In Scotland, they get the survey done first. So the seller of the property has to get the survey done of the whole house, and then obviously the person who's making the offer has the survey in front of them, so they can see whether or not there's any issues on there before they make the offer, if they want to do negotiation or anything else. But bear in mind, and this is one thing that kind of came up at the end of ours, when you're making your offer in Scotland, you're not completely safe with the survey. So with our survey, it said it scored on a 1, 2, 3, 1 being fine, 2 being some issues, 3 being it needs to be fixed, right now pretty much, or very, very soon. So ours was all a 2, which was fantastic. But in my offer that we made, our solicitor had asked for warranties to be provided for things like the gas and the windows and everything else. But as it got to the end of the process, their solicitor asked for those to be taken out. Now, what were we supposed to do at that point? There was nothing really we could do. It was either buy it or not. So we had to agree for them to take that clause out where warranties had to be provided. So in Scotland, you only have 5 days after you purchase a property in order to make a complaint about anything. Or after that, yeah, it's gone. You can't. There's no legal right to then say anything about the property. So when we moved in, we noticed there were several problems with windows, which we hadn't been on the survey, and also hadn't been noticed at our original view. We only viewed once because we were so far away. So I don't know whether it just got worse over time. There was one of the things we did notice, but 3 of the other things we definitely didn't notice. So I don't know whether it got worse over time, or whether before we came to view, they hair dried, or I have no idea. I don't even know if you can do that. But basically 3 of the windows upstairs, the double glazing has blown, and basically it creates kind of like I would imagine looking at over someone who's got really dodgy eyesight. So all the windows that you can't see properly through them in parts. So in this one, for example, it's the middle, and in the other 2 it's kind of in the same spot as well. But again, because there was no warranty provided for the windows, there's nothing we can do. There's no recourse. So we do have to buy 3 new windows, which sucks because we didn't expect to have to do that, but it's just one of those things. And then also we have Velux windows, and we knew at the time they looked a bit old, but I don't know what happened over the winter. It just got, I don't know, maybe they got battered or whatever, but they definitely need to be replaced as well. So basically that's 5 windows, which absolutely sucks, and it's not something we budgeted for. It's not something we planned for. It wasn't on the survey, but there you go. So don't think just because in Scotland they have this survey up front you're protected. It's not true. But it's just one of those things. When you buy a house, sometimes you have to do these things. Thankfully, touch wood, the heating is working, because obviously if you had to buy a new boiler on top of that, that would suck. But they had bought a new boiler a few years ago, and it had been serviced every year, and they actually did provide the service paperwork to show that it had been serviced. So not that we would have had necessarily any recourse about it, because they made us take out the warranty for warranty guarantee, so out of the contract, so that they would provide a guarantee for everything that had to be removed. So even if it hadn't been working, I don't think we would have had much recourse anyway. But touch wood, it's working. So and it's younger than our old boiler, because our old boiler was 11 years old. It was working perfectly fine. We had actually had it in warranted for a period of time as well, so it had British Gas come out to inspect it and everything, and it was perfectly fine. It worked just fine. But obviously, who knows, 11 years old, I don't know how long boilers last, but it was going perfectly fine. So hopefully it'll still go well for them for many years to come. But that was the thing about moving. I was, is this boiler going to be okay? But we do want to do improvements long term. So my husband is very much energy efficiency nut. He loves underfloor heating. He wants the battery pack and everything else. He wants solar and all these kind of things. So in the future, that's what we want to do anyway. So to have to do the windows was something we would have had to have done anyway to make those energy efficiency things work. So ultimately we would have had to have done them anyway, but we just didn't think we would have to do them right now, which sucks. But it does have to be done right now because of the fact that another winter, you know, it lets out heat. If the double glazing is blown, it's not working efficiently. The sound is not great either. So in terms of, you know, traffic noise and everything, so it needs to be fixed, and that's just something that we didn't plan for. It's just other things to be aware of in the buying selling process. But ultimately, to sum this video up, 100% we would definitely have purchased a shared ownership property again if we had to. It was a fantastic opportunity that you know, enabled us to be able to then go on to buy a whole house with a mortgage, obviously, but, you know, not have to do half rent half buy again. It enabled us to save equity. It also, because the prices in the area went up as well, we benefited from that. It gave us security for 11 years. We didn't have issues of people telling us that we'd have to move or something along those lines, you know, if they wanted to sell or whatever. The only cons I would say, and it's not necessarily cons, but there are things to be aware of. So your rent will increase, and ours did, by RPI every single year. So it's just something to bear in mind. Two, you have to be careful about what your service charge is. Now, with us, our service charge was very straightforward. It was just for their buildings insurance. There was nothing else involved in it, and it, you know, for that reason, I'm really happy and was very happy with it. But it's something to check to make sure, because especially with flats, sometimes the service charges can be astronomical. So just make sure, you know, you do all your due diligence at the beginning and make sure. We had to pay ground rent, but the people who now purchased our property don't, because they have eradicated ground rent. I don't know if that's for everybody. I hadn't really read up on it, to be honest, but our people who purchased didn't have to pay ground rent anymore. So that was fantastic. And I think if you're purchasing now as a new shared ownership person, you probably won't have to pay ground rent either, which is amazing. But we did, and that was a waste of money. So for 11 years we had to pay £150 a year, which was a complete waste of money. Nothing was ever done with that. There was no improvements ever made, so they just pocketed that money. Also, check when you're purchasing that you can eventually buy or own the freehold. So with us, you could get the freehold provided you purchase the rest of the property, and there was no charge. It was just all thrown in at the end. Really important, and I would say try and negotiate that if it's not a free thing. So sometimes people say, oh, you have to pay, you know, a certain amount to get the freehold. Ours wasn't, and I'd try and negotiate that if you can to get it from leasehold to freehold. Although, again, I've heard rumours and things like that. Again, I wasn't following it closely because we were moving, but I heard rumours about where they were trying to get rid of leasehold. So maybe this won't even be an issue for you, but if it still is currently, make sure that the freehold is free once you purchase the whole thing in full. And as I said in my first video, try not to leave it too long till you can staircase up, provided that you're not entering at a really high point. If you're entering at a really high point, then obviously give chance maybe for the market to settle. But if you're entering at a lower point like we did, try and staircase up sooner, because then you'll get full equity rights of the whole thing as opposed to only getting half. But that's everything. So I hope that was helpful for you, and completely possible to move from England to Scotland. No issues whatsoever, apart from things that came up in the normal legal process. But I would definitely recommend doing it with one solicitor if you can, rather than two. So that's everything. If you've got any questions, leave them below. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Bye for now.